Some scars are visible. They tell stories that strangers can see and understand at a glance. But the wounds I brought home from my third tour were not the kind you could bandage or stitch closed. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder. I called it hell. Nights became endless cycles of waking up screaming, sheets soaked with sweat, heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. Days blurred together in a fog of hypervigilance and isolation. I could not sit in restaurants. I could not shop in crowded stores. I could not even attend my own sister's wedding because the thought of being surrounded by people made my throat close. Medication helped dull the edges, but it also dulled everything else. Therapy gave me words for what I was experiencing, but words did not stop the flashbacks. For 2 years, I lived half a life, trapped between memories I could not escape and a present I could not fully inhabit. Then, through a veterans support program, I met Ranger. Ranger was not just a dog. He was a golden retriever trained specifically for veterans with PTSD. From the moment they placed his leash in my hand, something shifted. He watched me with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to the broken parts. The first night I had a nightmare with him in the house. I woke to find him already there, his weight pressing against my side, his nose nudging my hand, pulling me back to reality. Ranger was trained to alert before panic attacks, placing his paw on my knee when my breathing changed or when my hands started to shake. He would create space around me in public places, standing between me and others when my anxiety spiked. He knew how to lead me to exits when environments became overwhelming. With Ranger, I slowly reclaimed pieces of my life. I could go to grocery stores. I could sit in parks. I could breathe again. When my lease ended, I decided it was time for a fresh start. I found a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Lakeside Estates. The yard was fenced, perfect for Ranger. The street was peaceful, ideal for walks without too many triggers. When I signed the paperwork, I felt something I had not felt in years: hope. The moving truck had barely pulled away when I first met Karen Morrison. She appeared on my porch with a clipboard and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome to Lakeside Estates," she said, looking past me into my half-unpacked living room. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. We have very specific guidelines here that maintain our property values." I nodded politely, eager to get back to unpacking. That was when Ranger appeared beside me, his service vest clearly marked, his leash looped around my wrist. Karen's smile disappeared instantly. Her eyes narrowed at Ranger, then at me. "That is quite a large animal," she said, her voice dropping several degrees. "We have strict rules about pets here." "Ranger is not a pet," I explained, my hand instinctively finding his head. "He is a service dog. I am a veteran with PTSD." Karen's lips pursed like she had tasted something sour. "Well, service animal or not, dangerous breeds are not welcome in our community. I hope he is properly trained." Ranger sat perfectly still beside me, the picture of discipline and calm, even as Karen stared him down with undisguised distrust. I felt my chest tighten, but forced a polite smile. "He is trained to the highest standard. Federal law protects service animals regardless of HOA regulations." "We will see about that," she muttered, handing me a thick packet of HOA guidelines. "Everyone follows the same rules here, everyone." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart racing. Ranger pressed his weight against my legs, grounding me. I took a deep breath. "It is okay, buddy," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "We are not looking for trouble, we just want peace." I did not know then that peace was the last thing Karen intended to give us. I did not know that her neat pencil skirts and organized clipboard hid a cruelty that would soon target the one thing keeping me together. I just wanted to believe that after everything, I deserved a quiet place to heal. I was wrong. The first official letter arrived 3 days after I moved in. It was printed on HOA letterhead and specified regulations about approved pets in Lakeside Estates. The rules stated clearly, no animals over 50 pounds, no aggressive breeds, and all pets must be on leashes no longer than 4 feet when outside the home. At the bottom, in bold red ink, someone had written, "Violations are subject to fines of $200 per day." I sighed, placed the letter in a folder, and drafted a polite response. I explained that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals were not classified as pets and were exempt from such restrictions. I attached copies of Ranger's certification, his training documentation, and a letter from my psychiatrist explaining his necessity for my medical condition. I hand-delivered it to Karen's mailbox, hoping that would resolve the issue. It did not. The next day, 2 more letters arrived. One cited multiple complaints about an unleashed dog in the neighborhood, a complete fabrication as Ranger was never off-leash. The second referenced a bylaw about nuisance animals and claimed that Ranger had been barking excessively. Another lie, as Ranger was trained not to bark except in specific alert situations. I called the HOA office and requested a meeting with the full board. The receptionist sounded sympathetic but told me all complaints had to go through Karen first. When I asked for the contact information for other board members, she hesitated. "I am not supposed to give that out," she whispered. "She checks all communications." That weekend, I noticed how people watched us during our morning walks. Neighbors who had waved during my first days now crossed to the other side of the street. An older couple who had been gardening promptly went inside when they saw us approaching. At the community mailbox, a woman pulled her child closer as we passed, though Ranger was perfectly behaved at my side. The whispers reached me in fragments: dangerous dog, special treatment, liability. I realized Karen had been busy spreading her own version of our story throughout the neighborhood. "I heard he bit someone in his last neighborhood." She said those service vests can be bought online by anyone. "What if he attacks one of the children?" With each passing day, the isolation grew heavier. Not for Ranger. He remained steadfast, his training unaffected by the hostility around us. But for me, the sideways glances and whispered comments triggered the very anxiety he was trained to help me manage. The hypervigilance I had fought so hard to control returned, amplified by the very real knowledge that we were being watched and judged. I began documenting everything. I installed a security camera on my porch. I recorded every interaction on my phone. I saved every letter, every email, every text. I researched ADA laws until I could recite them from memory. I contacted a veterans advocate who specialized in service animal disputes, who assured me I was within my rights. "Document and remain calm," she advised. "Do not give them anything they can use against you." 6 weeks into living at Lakeside Estates, a petition was circulated to review dangerous animals in the community. It never specifically named me or Ranger, but the implication was clear. Karen stood in driveways with her clipboard, speaking in urgent tones to my neighbors. From my window, I watched them nod along, signing their names to her campaign. Through it all, Ranger remained my anchor. When my hands trembled with frustration, he would place his paw on my knee. When the nightmares returned, intensified by the stress, he was there, his weight steady against me. "We will get through this," I would tell him, running my fingers through his golden fur. "We have survived worse." What I did not know was that Karen was running out of patience with her paper war. What I did not know was that she had decided to take matters into her own hands. What I did not know was that her hatred had crossed a line from petty harassment into something much darker. And I was not prepared for what would happen next. Thursday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for our early walk. Ranger was especially attentive that day, pressing closer to me than usual as we left the house. Looking back, I wonder if he sensed what was coming. Service dogs often pick up on changes in energy, threats that humans miss. But I was focused on the simple pleasure of breathing fresh air, of feeling almost normal for a few minutes. We took our usual route through the neighborhood, past the small pond where ducks gathered. Ranger walked perfectly at heel, his service vest bright against his golden coat, his leash slack in my hand because he never pulled. We had just turned onto Maple Street when I saw her. Karen was power walking in our direction, dressed in expensive athletic wear, her face set in grim determination. Normally, she avoided our path entirely. Today, she was heading straight for us. My pulse quickened. Ranger pressed against my leg, his alert that my anxiety was rising. "I need to speak with you," Karen called out, her voice carrying across the morning quiet. "About that animal." I stopped walking, keeping Ranger close. "Good morning, Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Is there something I can help you with?" She closed the distance between us quickly, her eyes fixed not on me but on Ranger. "The board has reviewed your case," she announced. "We have determined that your pet is not in compliance with community standards. You have 24 hours to remove it from the property." "Ranger is not a pet," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "He is a service animal protected by federal law. The ADA supersedes HOA regulations in this case." Karen's face flushed red. "I am tired of your excuses. That dog is a menace. He lunged at me last week." The lie was so blatant I actually laughed. "Ranger has never lunged at anyone. He is a trained service animal who assists with my disability, and we both know you have been avoiding us entirely, so there was no opportunity for such an incident." "Are you calling me a liar?" she hissed, stepping closer. Ranger remained perfectly still beside me, though I could feel tension in his body. He was doing his job, staying calm even as the situation escalated. "I am saying your claim is false," I replied, keeping my voice level. "We will continue to follow the law. If you have concerns about the legitimacy of my service animal, you can take it up with the Department of Justice." What happened next occurred so quickly I had no time to react. Karen's hand plunged into her small waist pack and emerged with a pink canister. "If you will not control your dangerous animal," she snarled, "I will protect this community myself." Before I could move, before I could shield him, she sprayed Ranger directly in the face with what I later learned was industrial-strength pepper spray. The kind designed to stop human attackers. The kind not meant for animals, especially not at point-blank range. Ranger's yelp tore through the morning quiet. He dropped to the ground, pawing frantically at his face, his body twisting in pain. His breathing turned ragged and desperate. I fell to my knees beside him, horror and disbelief flooding through me. "What have you done?" I shouted, fumbling for my water bottle to rinse his eyes. He was not doing anything. Karen stepped back, the spray can still in her hand. "It attacked me," she announced loudly, though Ranger had not moved an inch toward her. Everyone saw it lunge. But there had been no lunge. There had been no threat. There had been only a trained service dog standing calmly beside his handler before being assaulted. People were coming out of their houses now, drawn by the commotion. Ranger was seizing on the ground, his body reacting violently to the chemicals. I cradled his head, trying to keep him still, trying to rinse his eyes with the little water I had. "Someone call a vet," I yelled, my voice breaking. "Please." Through my panic, I was vaguely aware of phones being raised. Someone was recording. Someone else was on a call, describing what they had seen. Karen stood a few feet away, already crafting her narrative, telling a small cluster of neighbors how the dangerous dog had threatened her. I stopped listening. All that mattered was Ranger. I scooped his 60-pound body into my arms, ignoring the strain on my back, and carried him to my car. His fur was wet with water and saliva, his eyes swollen shut, his breathing labored. Every whimper felt like a knife in my chest. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic was a blur. Red lights meant nothing. Speed limits were irrelevant. All that mattered was getting him help. All that mattered was saving the dog who had saved me. As I carried Ranger through the doors of the clinic, his body limp in my arms, a cold clarity cut through my panic. What Karen had done was not just cruel. It was not just vindictive. It was criminal. And for the first time since moving to Lakeside Estates, I was done trying to keep the peace. The veterinary clinic was a flurry of activity as they rushed Ranger into treatment. I paced the waiting room for 3 hours, unable to sit still, unable to process what had happened. When the vet finally emerged, her expression was grave but hopeful. "He has chemical burns to his eyes, nose, and mouth," she explained, leading me to a small exam room where Ranger lay sedated on a table. "We have flushed his eyes extensively and applied medication to reduce the swelling. His respiratory system shows irritation from inhaling the spray, but we have him on oxygen support. The seizure was likely from pain and shock rather than neurological damage." I stared at Ranger's still form, at the swelling that distorted his gentle face, at the tubes providing him oxygen. "Will he recover?" "Physically, I believe so," she said. "But there may be lasting impacts on his vision and his ability to work as a service animal. Psychological trauma in working dogs can be significant. He may develop fear responses that interfere with his training." The thought that Karen had potentially destroyed not just Ranger's health, but his ability to work, the very thing that gave both of us our freedom, made something harden inside me. I called the local police from the vet's office, reporting the assault. The officer who took my statement seemed uncertain. "So this is about a dog getting pepper sprayed?" he clarified. "Usually these neighborhood disputes are civil matters." "This is not a neighborhood dispute," I said, my voice tight. "This is the intentional assault of a service animal, which is protected under federal law." The officer promised to look into it, but I could tell from his tone that it was not a priority. I spent the night at the veterinary clinic, sleeping in a chair beside Ranger's kennel, waking every time he whimpered in his sedated sleep. By morning, something unexpected had happened. The video of the incident had found its way online. My phone began buzzing with notifications. Local animal rights groups were sharing the footage. Veterans organizations were expressing outrage. And my email contained a message from someone I had never met, a woman named Sarah Lancaster who identified herself as an ADA compliance attorney. "I saw the video of what happened to your service dog," her email read. "What that woman did is not just morally reprehensible, it is a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. Section 1368, which prohibits harming service animals. I would like to help you pursue justice. No charge." I called Sarah immediately. As Ranger lay recovering in his kennel, she explained that the Americans with Disabilities Act classified service animals as medical equipment, and that intentionally interfering with or harming a service animal was equivalent to tampering with a wheelchair or taking away someone's prosthetic limb. "The local police might not understand the severity," she explained, "but the Department of Justice takes these cases very seriously. We need to file a federal complaint immediately." Over the next week, as Ranger slowly recovered enough to come home, Sarah helped me document everything. We compiled the HOA letters, the security footage from my home showing Karen's escalating harassment, the medical reports from the veterinarian detailing Ranger's injuries, and statements from neighbors who had witnessed the attack. Despite the growing case against her, Karen showed no remorse. Instead, she doubled down. A notice appeared on community bulletin boards warning about dangerous animals in the neighborhood and the necessity of self-defense. She filed a counter-complaint with animal control, claiming Ranger had lunged at her repeatedly. She even had the audacity to appear at my door with an HOA fine for unleashed animal in common areas, though the video clearly showed Ranger had been leashed during the entire incident. I did not engage. I did not argue. I simply closed the door in her face and added the fine notice to our growing file of evidence. Sarah moved quickly, filing complaints with multiple agencies: the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the Housing and Urban Development Office, and the State Attorney General. "This is not just about Ranger," she explained. "This is about protecting the rights of every person with a disability who depends on a service animal." The weeks that followed were a strange combination of grief and purpose. During the day, I worked with Sarah, giving statements, filing paperwork, building our case. At night, I tended to Ranger, whose eyes remained sensitive to light, whose once confident demeanor had been replaced by caution and fear. He flinched at sudden movements. He startled at loud voices. The trauma had left marks deeper than the chemical burns. But slowly, I watched him heal. I watched him find his courage again, and in his resilience, I found my own strength hardening into resolve. Karen had believed she could bully a wounded veteran out of her perfect neighborhood. She had believed that her HOA power made her untouchable. She had believed wrong. The day the federal agents came to interview me was the day I knew everything was about to change. They took my statement with solemn attention, reviewed our evidence with professional interest, and asked detailed questions about Ranger's training and certification. Before they left, one of them glanced at Ranger, who was resting on his special bed in the corner, still bearing the visible scars of Karen's attack. "We take these cases very seriously, sir," the agent said quietly. "What happened to your dog was not just an attack on an animal, it was an attack on your civil rights." As they drove away, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. Justice moves slowly, but it moves. Karen believed she was fighting a neighborhood battle with arbitrary rules and social pressure. She did not realize she had just picked a fight with federal law, and federal law was about to fight back. While the legal machinery began its slow progress toward justice, something else was happening around me. The video of Karen spraying Ranger had taken on a life of its own. What started as local outrage had expanded, rippling outward through social media, picked up by veterans groups, disability advocates, and animal lovers across the country. A local news van appeared outside my house 3 weeks after the incident. The reporter was respectful, keeping her distance when she saw how Ranger still startled at strangers. "Would you be willing to share your story?" she asked. "People need to understand what happened here." I hesitated, uncomfortable with attention, wary of making myself a target. But then I thought of other veterans with service animals, other disabled individuals who might face similar harassment. I agreed to the interview, sitting on my front porch with Ranger at my feet, his eyes still slightly clouded from the chemical damage. The story aired that evening on the local news. Decorated veteran service dog attacked by HOA president. By morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. By the end of the week, my quiet battle had become a public conversation about service animals, disability rights, and HOA overreach. The court of public opinion rendered its verdict long before any legal proceedings began. Comments flooded the online versions of the story. Veterans offered support and outrage. Service dog trainers explained the thousands of hours that go into training animals like Ranger. Legal experts weighed in on the federal protections in place. The impact in Lakeside Estates was immediate and dramatic. The HOA board, which had previously backed Karen without question, issued a public statement, distancing itself from the actions of individual board members. They announced an emergency meeting to review policies regarding service animals. Karen's name was conspicuously absent from the statement. Neighbors who had avoided us now approached with awkward apologies. "We did not understand," they would say, offering dog treats or gift cards to pet stores. "She told us something completely different." One woman brought over a homemade lasagna and tearfully admitted she had signed Karen's petition without questioning its purpose. Their sudden support felt complicated. Where were these people when Karen was posting warnings about Ranger on community boards? Where were they when we walked alone each morning, deliberately avoided by everyone on the street? Their belated kindness was welcome but bittersweet. More revealing were the stories that began to emerge about Karen herself. Former residents reached out through social media, sharing their own experiences with her targeted harassment. A family who had moved out the previous year described how she had tried to force them to remove a wheelchair ramp they had installed for their elderly mother. Another resident revealed that Karen had attempted to fine him for having an unapproved garden. The garden in question had been planted to accommodate his arthritis. Each story painted a clearer picture of a woman who wielded HOA rules like weapons, who targeted anyone she deemed unworthy of her perfect neighborhood. And each story strengthened the case building against her. Karen's response to her growing infamy was to paint herself as the victim. She gave an interview to a smaller, sympathetic news outlet, claiming she had felt threatened by an aggressive animal and had acted in self-defense. She appeared with her arm in a sling, an injury she attributed to Ranger, though no such injury had occurred. She spoke about her years of community service and how she was being persecuted for upholding standards. But the video told a different story, and in the face of that video, her lies crumbled. Through it all, Ranger continued to heal. The physical wounds faded faster than the emotional ones. He would still flinch when strangers approached too quickly. He would press himself against walls when we walked past the spot where the attack had occurred. But his training held firm. Even damaged, he remembered his purpose. Each evening, we would sit together on the back porch, away from the news vans and the curious eyes. I would run my fingers through his fur and whisper the same words. "We are going to be okay. We are going to get through this." And somehow, saying it to him made me believe it too. I felt torn between anger and a strange sense of vindication. I had never wanted a fight. I had never wanted attention. I had only wanted peace and the dignity of living with my disability without interference. But now that the fight had come to me, I found myself standing taller. The hypervigilance that had once been my curse now focused my resolve. The training that had taught me to complete the mission now steadied my determination to see this through. Karen had chosen the wrong veteran to bully, and she had broken the wrong law. The federal charges came down 4 months after the incident. I will never forget the sight of federal agents approaching Karen's house early on a Tuesday morning. From my kitchen window, I watched as they spoke with her at her door, as her expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief to fear. I watched as they handed her documents, as her husband appeared behind her, as the reality of what was happening finally broke through her armor of entitlement. Karen Morrison was charged with violating federal law 18 U.S.C. Section 1368, harming animals used in law enforcement. The charge carried potential prison time and substantial fines. Additional charges included violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and intimidation based on disability status. The Department of Justice did not prosecute these cases often, but when they did, they prosecuted them fully. The pretrial period was a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and meetings with federal prosecutors. Sarah Lancaster stayed by my side through all of it, explaining legal terms, preparing me for testimony, reassuring me when my confidence wavered. "This is bigger than just you and Ranger," she would remind me. "This case will protect other service animal handlers." The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. Security was tight the day of the trial. Veterans groups had organized a show of support, lining the steps with service dogs and their handlers. Animal rights activists held signs with Ranger's photo. Reporters called out questions as Sarah guided me through the crowd. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and formal. Karen sat with her defense team, dressed conservatively, her expression carefully composed. She did not look at me when I entered. Her husband sat directly behind her, his face grim. The HOA board members were conspicuously absent. The prosecution's opening statement was clear and direct. This was not about neighborhood disputes or HOA regulations. This was about the intentional assault of a service animal, an extension of its handler, protected under federal law. This was about a pattern of harassment and discrimination against a disabled veteran. Karen's defense argued that she had acted out of fear, that she believed Ranger posed a threat, that she had a right to defend herself. They tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who made a single misjudgment in a moment of panic. But then the evidence began. The HOA letters documenting her escalating campaign against us. The security footage showing Ranger's perfect behavior during our walks. The veterinary reports detailing the severity of his injuries. The testimony from neighbors who had witnessed the attack. And finally, the video itself, played on screens throughout the courtroom. Watching it again, seeing Ranger collapse in pain, hearing my own desperate voice, brought all the anger and helplessness flooding back. I focused on my breathing, on staying present. Ranger, who had been permitted in the courtroom as my service animal, pressed his weight against my leg, still doing his job even in this place of stress. When I took the stand, my voice was steadier than I expected. I spoke about my PTSD, about what Ranger did for me, about how his service had given me back my life. I described the months of harassment, the isolation, the fear. And I described that morning on the sidewalk when Karen had taken away my medical equipment, my independence, my sense of safety, all with one deliberate act of cruelty. "Did you ever threaten Ms. Morrison?" the prosecutor asked. "No," I answered. "Did Ranger ever display aggressive behavior toward her or anyone else?" "Never. He is trained specifically not to react to provocations. That is part of what makes him a service animal and not just a pet." During cross-examination, Karen's attorney tried to suggest that I had failed to control my dog, that I had antagonized her client, that I had refused to comply with reasonable community standards. But the evidence did not support any of their claims. My answers remained consistent. The truth was on my side. Karen's testimony came next. She spoke with practiced confidence about her work with the HOA, her commitment to community safety, her concern about large animals near children. She claimed she had felt threatened by Ranger, that he had growled at her, that the spray had been a last resort. But under cross-examination, her story began to unravel. The prosecutor showed footage of Ranger calmly sitting beside me during the encounter. He presented evidence of her statements to neighbors about getting rid of that dog weeks before the incident. He read from HOA minutes where she had specifically targeted the service animal at 1842 Oakwood Drive, despite being informed of ADA protections. "Ms. Morrison," the prosecutor said, his voice calm but firm, "the video clearly shows that the dog was not approaching you, was not growling, was not displaying any aggressive behavior whatsoever. It shows you approaching them with the pepper spray already in your hand. How do you explain that?" Her composure faltered. "The video does not show everything. Multiple witnesses have testified that the dog was calm and controlled. Are they all lying?" "They did not see what I saw." The exchange continued, her answers becoming more defensive, more contradictory. When she left the stand, her face was flushed with anger, not remorse. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Karen received 6 months in federal prison, a $25,000 fine, 5 years of probation during which she could not serve on any HOA board, and mandatory community service with a disability advocacy organization. The judge was clear. This sentence was meant to send a message that service animals were protected under federal law and that those protections would be enforced. As the bailiff led Karen away, she looked at me for the first time. There was no apology in her eyes, only resentment, only the indignation of someone who still believed she had done nothing wrong. I did not look away. I held her gaze until she passed through the courtroom doors. Outside, standing in the bright sunlight with Ranger pressed against my leg, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time: vindication. Not just for myself, but for every person with a disability who had ever been bullied, disbelieved, or pushed aside. The system, for once, had worked as it was supposed to. "How do you feel about the verdict?" a reporter called out. I looked down at Ranger, who looked back at me with eyes that were still slightly clouded but filled with the same devotion they had always held. "Justice was served," I said simply. "Not just for us, but for all service animals and the people who depend on them." As the cameras flashed, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The fight was over. Now the healing could truly begin. The media frenzy faded within weeks of the sentencing. The reporters moved on to other stories. The activists found new causes. Life in Lakeside Estates slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Karen's house went up for sale before she even began serving her sentence. Her husband moved out quietly one weekend, avoiding eye contact with neighbors. The "for sale" sign stood in their front yard like a marker of defeat. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring. The board members who had enabled Karen's behavior resigned, replaced by a new group that included a wheelchair user and the parent of a child with autism. They rewrote the community guidelines to explicitly acknowledge and accommodate service animals. They instituted a mandatory training program for all board members on disability rights and federal protections. Ranger and I continued our daily walks, but something had changed. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid us now stopped to chat. Children asked if they could pet Ranger, always with the proper protocol. "Is your dog working right now?" The isolation that had marked our first months was replaced by a cautious but genuine welcome. Ranger's physical recovery continued slowly. His eyes remained sensitive to bright light, requiring special protective gear on sunny days. His breathing sometimes became labored during exercise, a lasting effect of the chemical damage to his lungs. But his training held. Despite what Karen had done to him, he remained steady in his work, alert to my needs, dedicated to his purpose. The psychological healing was harder. For weeks after the attack, Ranger would tremble when we approached the spot where it had happened. He would press closer to me when strangers reached toward him. A service dog trainer who specialized in rehabilitating traumatized working animals visited weekly, helping him rebuild his confidence through careful exposure and positive reinforcement. I found myself healing alongside him. The nightmares that had plagued me since returning from war merged with new ones featuring Karen and her spray can. But each morning, I would wake to find Ranger already alert, already there, his presence pulling me back to the present. We rebuilt our routines together. We reclaimed our sense of safety together. 3 months after the trial, I received an invitation to speak at a veterans support group in the neighboring town. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my strength, and my story still felt raw, still felt private. But something pushed me to accept. Perhaps it was the knowledge that my experience might help others. Perhaps it was the need to transform what had happened into something meaningful. The group met in the basement of a community center. About 20 veterans sat in a circle of chairs, their expressions a familiar mix of guardedness and hope. Ranger lay at my feet as I spoke, his weight against my shoes keeping me grounded. I told them about my PTSD, about how Ranger had changed my life, about Karen and her campaign against us. I told them about the law that had protected us when local authorities would not. "I never wanted to be the center of a federal case," I concluded. "I never wanted attention. I just wanted to live in peace with my service dog. But I learned something important through all of this. Our rights are only protected if we are willing to stand up for them. And sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who comes after you." When I finished speaking, the room was quiet. Then an older veteran in the back raised his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "My daughter has MS. She is getting a service dog next month. Because of people like you, she will be safer." After the meeting, as I gathered my things to leave, a young man approached hesitantly. He could not have been more than 25, with the tight posture and watchful eyes I recognized from my own mirror. Beside him stood a German shepherd wearing a service vest, still showing the uncertainty of a dog in training. "I got back from Afghanistan 6 months ago," the young man said, his voice low and carefully controlled. "They diagnosed me with PTSD. Some days are really hard. I just got matched with Apollo here last week." The German shepherd looked up at the sound of his name, alert and attentive despite his youth. "My housing complex has already started making noise about him," he continued. saying he is too big, asking for special fees. I was about to just give up and move, but then I heard about your case. He reached out slowly, offering his hand not to me but to Ranger. Ranger sniffed his fingers, then gently pressed his nose against the young man's palm, a gesture of acceptance. You taught me that I do not have to choose between my home and my service dog, the young veteran said. You showed me that the law is on our side. I just wanted to say thank you. Something tight in my chest loosened at his words. The months of stress, the public scrutiny, the grueling legal process, suddenly it all had purpose beyond just my own justice. It had created a path for others to follow. I gave him my contact information and the name of Sarah Lancaster, the attorney who had helped me. You are not alone in this, I told him, and neither is Apollo. The drive home that night felt different. The neighborhood that had once seemed hostile now just looked like houses, streets, trees. The fear that had colored my perception had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. This was my home now. We had earned our place here. Ranger sat in the passenger seat beside me, his head raised to catch the evening breeze through the cracked window. Despite everything he had endured, he remained steadfast. His resilience had taught me something profound about healing, that it does not mean erasing the wounds, but learning to carry them with grace. As we turned onto our street, I noticed a moving truck parked in front of Karen's former house. A young family was unloading furniture, children racing across the lawn that Karen had once monitored with ruler and clipboard. Their laughter carried through the evening air, replacing the memory of her sharp voice and cold stares. Life was continuing. The neighborhood was healing too. In the weeks that followed, I established a new routine. 3 evenings a week, I volunteered with a local organization that trained service dogs for veterans. I could not handle the dogs directly, that required specialized certification, but I could share my experience with the veterans who were being matched with their new companions. I could help them understand the legal protections they had, the boundaries they could set, the confidence they could carry. Your service animal is not just a dog, I would tell them. Under federal law, they are considered medical equipment. They are an extension of you and your rights. Never let anyone make you feel like you are asking for special treatment. You are simply asking for equal access. Ranger would accompany me to these sessions, a living example of the bond we were describing. The veterans would watch how he anticipated my needs, how he responded to subtle signals, how he maintained his training even in distracting environments. And in their eyes, I could see hope taking root, the same hope that had changed my life when Ranger first came into it. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived from the federal prosecutor who had handled our case. She wrote to inform me that our case was being used in training materials for law enforcement agencies across the country, teaching officers about service animal protections and how to properly respond to incidents of harassment or assault against them. Your willingness to pursue justice has created a valuable precedent, she wrote. Because of you and Ranger, other service animal handlers will find a system more prepared to protect their rights. I showed the letter to Ranger, who sniffed it politely before returning to his favorite spot by the window. He did not understand the words, of course. He did not know that his suffering had created change, that his story had educated judges and police officers and community leaders. He only knew that he had a job to do to stay by my side, to alert to my anxiety, to ground me when the world became too much. And he did that job perfectly, despite everything. Following spring, the HOA invited me to speak at their annual meeting. The irony was not lost on me. The same organization that had once tried to drive me out now wanted to showcase their commitment to inclusion. I considered declining. But then I thought of the other residents with disabilities, visible and invisible, who might be watching. I thought of what it would mean for them to see someone like me standing at the podium, speaking with authority in a space that had once been weaponized against me. I accepted. The meeting room was crowded, faces both familiar and new. Ranger lay at my feet as I addressed the community, his presence a silent reminder of why I was there. I did not speak about Karen or the trial. I did not dwell on the past injustices. Instead, I spoke about community, about accessibility, about the simple dignity of being allowed to exist in one's home without fear or judgment. A neighborhood is more than just houses and rules, I concluded. It is a collection of lives, all different, all valuable. The strength of a community lies not in its uniformity, but in its ability to embrace diversity, to make space for everyone, including those of us with different needs, different abilities, different ways of moving through the world. The applause that followed was genuine, not universal. There were still some who looked away, uncomfortable with the implicit criticism of what had come before, but enough to suggest that real change was possible, that what had happened to Ranger and me might have transformed more than just our own story. As I took my seat, an elderly woman reached across the aisle to touch my arm. "My grandson has autism," she whispered. "He is getting a service dog next year. I was so worried about bringing him to visit me here. Now I know he will be welcome." In that moment, I understood something important about healing, that it is not always about going back to who you were before the trauma. Sometimes, it is about becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who can transform personal pain into public good. Ranger and I still take our morning walks around the pond. His pace has slowed slightly with age, but his training remains impeccable. The scars in his eyes have faded to a slight cloudiness that only I can detect. He no longer flinches when strangers approach. He no longer hesitates when we pass the spot where it happened. And neither do I. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think about Karen serving her sentence, attending her mandated community service with disability organizations. I wonder if she has learned anything. I wonder if she has changed. But mostly, I do not think about her at all. She no longer has power over my peace of mind. Instead, I focus on the life we have built here, Ranger and I, in the neighborhood that tried to reject us and now embraces us. I focus on the veterans I meet each week, on their journey from trauma to healing, on the dogs that will help them make that journey. I focus on the simple miracle of waking up each morning without fear, of walking through my front door with confidence, of knowing that my rights and Ranger's purpose are protected by law. It is not the life I imagined when I came home from war, broken and lost. It is not the quiet, anonymous existence I thought I wanted. But it is a life with meaning. It is a life where my suffering and Ranger's suffering have created something valuable for others. It is a life where justice was not just an abstract concept, but a concrete reality. And that, I have learned, is its own kind of victory, quiet, enduring, and profoundly sweet.